Today on the AI Proving Ground podcast, deepfakes, deception, and user experience? You've heard the horror stories, synthetic voices stealing identities, videos that rewrite reality. But what if this same technology could be used not to trick us, but delight us? On today's show, I'm joined by AI veteran and global VP of retail for WWT, Adam Dumey, as well as AI and deepfake expert Chris Roberts, to explore the double-edged sword of deepfakes in the age of personalization. From AI's early days locked behind proprietary walls to today's mass market accessibility, Adam takes us through the evolution. And Chris? Well, he's here to remind us just how real the risks still are. But here's the twist. What if seeing your own face in online ads or even in a dressing room mirror wasn't creepy but compelling? Could synthetic media actually become your most powerful marketing tool? Stick around because what you hear today might just reshape how you think about identity, influence, and the future of AI-driven commerce. Chris, our first repeat guest, congratulations. You and your beard made it back for round two.
Yeah, appreciated. I got let back in the studio again, and this time, obviously, thanks to Adam. Much appreciated, sir.
Yeah, and Adam, first time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about deepfakes and AI and retail today. We'll get into the meat of the conversation here in a bit. But Adam, I'm just curious from your perspective. You've been doing AI for more than a decade, from what I can tell, back to the IBM Watson days in a prior career of yours. What have you seen from that point to today and how AI has shifted not only in the technological advancements, but just how the industry and the public looks to consume it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So back when I started, everything in AI was proprietary. So forget the software, but the hardware. It had to run on this exact hardware. And so the cost of that was so high, it limited to just a certain number of writers across the world. So the adoption wasn't fantastic and great. So the great thing about the past 2 years in particular is all those challenges have been mitigated. And also AI, when I started, was really driven from an enterprise level, and now it's a consumer level. So the accessibility is much, much greater. And so that unlocks a lot of different use cases and creativity. And so just the presence and availability and awareness of what AI can do every day just continues to increase and deepen.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about some of those challenges mitigated. One of the challenges not mitigated, perhaps even increasing, Chris, deepfakes. Level set with us before we get into the retail components here. What are deepfakes by your definition, and where are they at right now in terms of the landscape?
So I think you got a couple of different areas to look at. If you look at the stuff that we see a lot more of, it's the video deepfakes. So it's me taking a video of Adam giving maybe a keynote speech somewhere and changing the context of it completely. So instead of him giving a keynote, like I've done with a couple of folks inside here, he resigns from WWT and go raises koalas in Tasmania. And it looks real, it sniffs real, it smells real, and all this other good stuff. So that's one. The audio deepfakes is what we're seeing a lot of from the attacks against corporations, which is, again, I change my voice characteristics. I can use my only words, but my voice characteristics masks, say, maybe the CFO. I get you to transfer money. And then obviously we have text, we have social media, and all the other stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, so that's the state of deepfakes. Deepfakes can get that scary rap. We hear about all the bad things that happen, but Adam, you see opportunity here, specifically as it relates to retail.
Yeah, if you think of retail, the holy grail is personalization. So understanding what Brian wants, when Brian wants it, and how I could serve him up. And to do that, you need a lot of data, right? And so once you have that data, the question is, what do you do with it? And so back, 20 years ago, it was, okay, here's Brian's zip code, here are the attributes associated with it. Now we're moving to a world where we're not too far off of a deepfake being part of a campaign. So you can imagine, what's your favorite airline, let's say?
I'm a Southwest frequent flyer.
Perfect. Imagine you got served a Southwest ad that had your face and likeness in the preferred seat on a Southwest plane, leaving you at a certain destination which you particularly enjoy, and the excursions and the activities. That creates a very compelling emotional connection that should drive conversion. And so to what Chris mentioned earlier, that ability of taking a synthetic image of someone with high fidelity, but using it more for good to have them visualize an experience, we're having conversation of that with customers right now. And so we're not quite there. There's still kind of a data foundation that across the retail lens isn't quite checked, but we're not very far away.
Yeah, Chris, what are you seeing? Deepfake for good might be a little bit of a 180 view for some. Are you seeing that starting to take place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same thing Adam and I have talked about. It's the same thing walking into a store. I mean, if you think about it nowadays, when you walk into a store, typically you're going in for reasons, whys, wherefores, or logic. You've had an influence online through media or something else. But again, taking the idea from Adam, I walk into a 511 store, I walk into an REI or somewhere like that, and I see an image of me. We were working on something for RSA and a couple of other conferences where you walk up to literally a dark mirror and you see an image of yourself. And what we were going to do and have some fun with it was change it to be a male version, a female version, put some ethnicity in there, have some fun with it, but also show all of their social media.
Yeah.
So how much of this data makes this person up? Because obviously we put so much out there. And to Adam's point, so much of it's being used now to basically profile you.
Yeah, and just think of the data present. So, retail, there's a physical and there's a digital component. So Chris hit on the digital, the physical side. So imagine you go into a mall, right? The second you park, the second you go in a store, the second you go in a hallway, the second you interact with a product, you hover in an aisle. That data is being captured. And so now you layer that on top of the digital footprint, which traces everything from the second you put on your computer to the website, the sequence, the information. So now there's this really rich picture. And that data now with some of the technology we're seeing in the deepfake space is being used to extend the reach of what AI and data can do. So I think it's fascinating, but it also is interesting. As you think about new technology, everyone's fearful, right? If you go back to the car, it was called the devil wagon for a while, right? You think of the printing press and the issues of Catholic, right? There's an issue here about the concern. I think it originates from just lack of control. Right?
Yeah, it's lack of knowledge, lack of control. But I think the other part of it comes into as well, to your point with the car and all the other stuff, it was tangible.
That's right.
Whereas all of our data is so intangible these days.
And at the core of deepfake, it is you, right? It is Chris Roberts. And so losing the sense of ownership of that is a dangerous idea. So I worked at an intelligence agency years ago, early in my career, and I received a call 4 years ago from someone. And he told me, Adam, take that voicemail down on my mobile phone because it just had 18 seconds. That was enough to take that and create a synthetic image. And it started getting me thinking, look, what's mine, right? Back then, 4 years ago, I lost my voice. Now, I could lose everything else, right? So fundamentally, I think there's something intrinsic about deepfake that concerns and scares people. And I get it, but I think like any technology, there's another side.
I think it adds to that when you think about it. This is why we can't get rid of passwords. No matter when we talk about passwordless and everything else, we can't get rid of them because if we lose them, we can easily replace them. Just change the thing again, put different two factors and everything else. But if we lose our identity, it's gone.
It's gone.
The fingerprint goes, it's gone. We can't easily and readily replicate these things and get new ones. So I think that's the biggest thing as well, is this is the one last piece of me that in theory is still mine, but in reality it probably isn't.
That's right. And I think your point about what's tangible or not is it. So years ago, people would hand over their specimens for heritage testing and ancestry. Yes. And so once that was breached, everyone was upset. But to your point, it was just a swab that's someplace in California. But seeing your image and your likeness and combined with a high-fidelity voice characteristic, that is threatening.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I think that probably speaks to just the need for securing the entire solution to make sure those important data points, are safe and sound from a consumer's perspective to offer it trust.
Yes, but I think that's where part of the challenge comes in, because on one hand, you want to secure that data, but on the other hand, if I'm that retailer, obviously I'm going to maximize my investment by using it. Perfect example, if you ever look, I put a LinkedIn post out a couple of days ago, and I'd gone onto a website and it said, hi, sign here to share your information with 924 of our partners.
No more, no less.
No less. It was literally, had the number, it was in little yellow, and it was 900. That is, if I'd have said yes to that, or even if I said no to that stuff, they're still going to share that data with so many different people. So I think that's part of the problem is, I don't mind sharing something if I know that everybody's going to treat it the same way I should share it, or if it's going to get used in a for good reason. But if it starts, and this is where it gets really interesting with the retail sector, I don't mind somebody telling me something that maybe are like these things, the hoodies. I like them, I enjoy them. But if I go from a size large hoodie to a size extra large hoodie, I don't want that information going to my healthcare provider going, hey, Chris has put on a couple of extra pounds. You maybe want to do something about that. So that's where I think you have to be really, really careful with that data.
Yeah, and your question, obviously the data has to be secure, but we're having conversations with retailers now asking, do you even need that data? Right, so we had a conversation, we do a lot of work at Worldwide in QSR space, and so we're having a conversation with one QSR asking, do you really need all of this data, right? Some of it is old, some is outdated, some of it's third party. What's the data strategy you should invoke to get more relevant first party data and just the right amount? Because again, to the idea of personalization, you want to get the outcome, and historically it's just getting as much data as possible. But when you have that data, your attack vector increases. You now have to store that data where there's a cost, and you have to secure it. So we're having conversations to start pivoting a little bit about the basis of what you need for that personalization.
Well, you're talking a lot about a physical, environment here in terms of personalization. And then earlier you mentioned malls and AI in the same sentence. That was impressive. Perhaps the newest, most innovative technology with the state of malls these days.
That's right.
So kudos there. But are these retail deepfakes? Is it only in an environment of a physical store, or does it extend, omni-channel across everywhere a retailer wants to be?
So it's everything is everywhere now. I mean, deepfake goes back 2018, where everyone's favorite supermodel, Cara Delevingne, was, to my knowledge, part of the first ever deepfake campaign. So it was a European retailer that was looking to get penetration across certain areas of remote regions. Yeah. And so they leveraged her and her image and likeness. Back then, it was a voice component, to Chris's point, about the emergence of audio. And so that campaign generated 100 million impressions, 180 million. 40% of those was viral, free, and 54% of order increases. And so this thing has been around, and this is really more of a digital manifestation. Nowadays, again, the prevalence of data means that wherever that deepfake is articulated just has higher fidelity, right? And we've done deepfakes before. Chris has that. It takes 30 minutes and $12, right? It's just super cheap to do it. And so it doesn't require an expert. That accessibility we talked about earlier, combined with the data and all these different channels. And candidly, people's impressions of data now and people's impressions and trust in certain venues are so low that the consumption of that and acceptance is at a level that I think is dangerous.
To your point on the acceptance, you think about it, for the last several years, we've trained people, regular, normal people, with our phones. We've trained them to add extra filters. Yeah. We've trained them to change voices. You go back to the days when we had little GPS systems. My old GPS system used to have Monty Python on it. We can do that with Alexa. We can do that with all the Googles and the voices and all the other stuff. We can have them speak different languages, different phrases. We can put different faces on. So we've trained people to do this. And now, unfortunately, on one hand, it's used, I wouldn't say for good, but it's used for betterment. But unfortunately, we're also seeing a huge amount of undertones of it being used for bad, and people aren't able to discern the good from bad these days.
Yeah. Well, and what can retailers, or any organization for that matter, do to better protect against the good versus the bad?
There's an element of education, but I think it's only a small element of education. You can only tell certain people so many times, hey, guess what? For the last 20, 30, 40 years, we've been telling you this stuff. Now you can't believe anything. That doesn't work. And that's, I think, where what we're trying to do a lot of inside WWT is work with a lot of the organizations to help them better understand the signals coming in, help them better process them, put the sentiment analysis behind them, and a whole bunch of other things to try to help them and the consumers understand, or even maybe make it so the consumers don't have to know that it's happening behind the scenes. I'm basically protecting them.
Yeah. And going back to your question or your intro about my history in AI, there's going to be a long runway before deepfakes are at a scalable position. So started AI in 2013. It's 2025. Enterprises are still implementing chatbots. So AI has come a long way. At the same time, from a scalable global enterprise perspective, that pace doesn't match, I think, what the consumer believes. And so as we think about deepfake, to me, it's a progression. And the progression of deepfake from retail lens is about hyper-personalization. And so to get there, there are other elements of personalization that will drive more of an acceptance. So seeing on your phone at the right time, when you're ready, an offer that's compelling, eventually once that starts to take, more of a prevalence, all of a sudden now you're accepting of using your data in a way that's permissible. And eventually that's going to lead itself to more intrusive, more personalized manifestations of that.
Another good example, I came out of the aviation side of things before I came here. We were looking at using AI modeling, not just inside the safety of the avionics, but also the passenger experience.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from as the passenger walks up to the airport, recognizing it's that passenger, how do I personalize that experience with the passenger? As the passenger gets onto the plane, how do I make sure that I'm greeting them effectively? How do I make sure as the screen comes down, they've got their favorites on, they've pulled their favorites from, either Apple or any of the other systems out there and said, hey, this is your environment. You're here for an extended period of time. We got you covered. But then you can also use it for the healthcare side of things as well. Not everybody likes flying. Not everybody's used to flying. Maybe somebody's not feeling well. So if you've got a camera that's able to sense temperature or moisture or liveliness, can that system then talk to somebody inside the actual the cabin crew and say, hey, passenger so-and-so in this area looking a little bit too hot. Go check on them.
Yeah. Well, we've mentioned QSRs, quick serve restaurants. We've mentioned outfitters. Where else might this apply across the retail landscape? Is it everybody could benefit from doing this once it's implemented at scale? Can we even think beyond that, broader than retail?
Short answer, you could think about it any segment. Within retail, though, we're having some customers with some retailers to leverage deepfakes more as a new revenue generation tool. So you can imagine going to a movie theater, for example, and instead of ordering popcorn from Brian, now there's a digital avatar that would take that. And so the benefit from a new revenue generation perspective, that avatar could be a local NBA player. It could be someone that's starring in the movie that you're about to go watch, right? And so that will drive sponsorship funds that they don't have right now. And so as we look across the landscape of retail, it doesn't have to be on a personal level. It could be a character, right? Think of all the cartoons and animated films. It could be a local presence. And so all these provide more compelling and localized experiences that we think, again, it doesn't just cut across a QSR or a fitness chain or a movie theater. It cuts across the broader retail umbrella and then financial services and healthcare the same way he described.
Think about it as well. I mean, we were down south a couple of weeks ago now talking to one of the box, what do you call it?
Your retailers.
Whatever, the home improvement. Home improvements. We were talking to a bunch of the folks down there. Imagine walking into those places with your own home plans or a couple of pictures. You're already able to see some of this, but imagine actually putting an AI architecture in place that builds it out for you, that makes those suggestions for you. You augment that with some of the reality glasses. All of a sudden now you can go, hey, I need A, B, C, and D. Here's the list. Here's everything I want, and here's how it looks. That's there. And that ability then, that's huge.
So you're talking about how that's there. Where are we at in terms of readiness standpoint? We've talked a lot about data. Are retailers or any of the clients that we engage with, are they ready to put these things into action? And what's the progression for starting to get to the point where they can offer these to their clients?
So from a retailer perspective, we're seeing that they are not ready. So across retail, they're still struggling with stovepipe systems, kind of disparate data localized around. And so really aggregating that and creating that data foundation that's required, that's underway. And like I mentioned earlier, personalization on the digital side is that first step and eventually from a deepfake perspective. But I do also think the consumer isn't ready for the reasons we mentioned earlier, right? There's a high level of distrust and unfamiliarity and also just confusion as to why I'm giving you my data to use, right? And all it takes is one bad actor, one inadvertent misstep, right? And so now retailers are using deepfakes in very sporadic ways, but more for fun. So you think of the Super Bowl, right? Gronk, right? Avocados from Mexico. Did you guys see this?
Yeah.
So he was a deepfake, and so it was really well done, very controlled. But you'd call a number, and Gronk would come up and give you a script about how to make avocados and guacamole. And so that's how they're doing it now. Is more for fun, more for brands, instead of a true one-on-one engagement. So we're quite a ways away from that level.
What other technical aspects might an organization have to think about to start putting these in place? We've talked about data already, but how do they integrate these systems into their current IT stack? What about where they're running these workloads, whether it's on-prem, cloud?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we do amazing here is that whole assessment, the kind of architectural assessment of what your current state is. Oftentimes our customers in retail don't know that. They don't know the legacy systems that are still active. They don't know the data stores that are still not interconnected. And so from an assessment perspective, that is how we approach it. And usually we unearth some pretty interesting, sometimes awkward findings, but it gets them to a position of knowledge so we can start identifying, one, is this the appropriate architecture, whether it's on-prem or on cloud or some hybrid? And then also, getting back to my earlier comment, is this the right data assortment that you need to obtain your objectives? Is this the optimal set?
I think the other one to add on to that one is definitely seeing, especially within some of the telco and some of the carriers, is they're willing to meet the consumer where the consumer is.
That's right.
There's been some fantastic conversations around that one, specifically around protection. You know, so many of them already have their own application stores and everything else. What they're looking to do in many cases is how can they elevate and enhance that? So we're looking a lot of the times at the solutions of, you know, how can we twin in capabilities on those systems, but also have, you know, cloud necessary wherever it is. So, yeah, some good conversations, very good
conversations.
This episode is supported by Akamai's Guardicore. Akamai's Guardicore offers advanced micro-segmentation solutions to protect critical assets from cyber threats. Secure your enterprise with Akamai's innovative security platform.
What about ROI? Everything with AI seems to always go back to ROI. Adam, do we have an understanding yet of what type of ROI these types of solutions could lead to?
So we talked about our favorite supermodel earlier. So that was amazing ROI.
Your favorite supermodel. My
favorite supermodel. I'm out. It happened. And so with regard to deepfake, it's too nascent. There's no yet ROI for that. The ultimate ROI, again, is going to be that one-to-one conversion. And to get there, we still have some of those prerequisites we need to check.
Yeah. So you go definitely on that side. So definitely on the proactive side, there's a lot
Correct.
of work.
Yes.
Yeah. Definitely on the defensive side of the world, there's some fairly serious ROIs we've been taking a look at. So perfect example, call centers. We're seeing 10, 15, 20% of inbound calls into any call center, be it retail, financial, or anything else, are coming across as fake. Every single one of those calls that's hitting a call person is obviously at cost. Mm-hmm. So what we've now seen is if we start looking at bolting in protections earlier in the call sequence, even before it gets to the even before it gets to the call handler, we're starting to see huge gains in that one. So there's some fantastic stuff in there.
And that's just the cost of time.
Oh, yeah.
And then if it actually gets to Chris and you fall for it, exponentially grows. And so in the retail side, we're working with several retailers on this idea of threat intelligence. And so the ROI it's kind of like insurance. Why do you buy insurance? What's the ROI every year? It's nothing. But when it hits, it hits. And so as you think about threat intelligence, understanding what people are saying about your brand across social media, across the dark web, and understanding how quickly those messages are starting to come up and rise to the surface. Is it a bot? Is it a human? Is it a text-oriented? Is it a video? Is it a deep fake? If it's a deep fake, how long does it take you to identify the deep fake before it's out there? And what damage to your brand is suffering during that period? And so very much view this as an insurance-like model, but from a pure ROI, from a retail perspective, like a personalization, still not quite there.
So how would you, understanding that a lot of organizations want to have that pathway to ROI, is it just start small, build momentum, keep going, be iterative, and then eventually you'll get to a state where you're ready to deploy this in more scalability?
Yeah, I think it's all about setting the foundations and getting those right. So like we talked about, it's about getting a strong data foundation to propel you to do other things. And so that's the first piece. And again, the on-ramp to more of a deep fake is more the digital, something that's not as tangible, something that you can just look at and consume and see the value of. And so moving from that and eventually into some targeted deep fake, and then more of a kind of a broad scale approach. Because once the deepfake engine is unearthed, it's not going to be cheap, right? And so you really want to make sure from a retailer perspective that you're implementing it at the right time for the right use case to draw that. And that's going to be, just like all this new technology, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah. The nice thing about it is, as well as we've been able to sit down with a number of clients and literally go through workshops. You know, I just came back from one up in Canada. Mm-hmm. We had 80 people, I think, actually we end up sending the data out to. Mm-hmm. Within one organization, the 40 or 50 attended the workshop. And it was fantastic. It was collaborative. We did 3 or 4 hours. We were up there collaborating on where they are, where they're going, where they want to be, how they're going to get there. And we talked about everything from like the data side of it, the identity side of it, the protection side of it, all sorts. And I think that's the nice thing about it. The conversations in that space are just so collaborative. Mm-hmm.
And to your point about the idea of this being tangible, deepfake really gives retailers and other folks in other industries something aspirational that they get. They understand, right? They see an image on the screen that's theirs. They can appreciate what the end state is versus something that's a bit more abstract. And so from an on-ramp and from a learning perspective, the benefit of this is it really provides this North Star that shines very bright.
Yeah. Adam, help me understand this a little bit better. If it's hyper-personalization and there's a deepfake of my likeness, say, and I'm walking into an outfitter, and Chris, to your example, I'm going from a large hoodie to an extra large hoodie. How do I see that on the deepfake and really trust that it's going to be the right fit? Is that like a latency thing, or is that just a data ingestion part?
Well, first, in your example, it would be conveyed usually through a mobile app, right? You would have the conversation with some entity that's representative of you. So it's capturing not just your size, but it's probably have other indicators, how often you've been to the gym, what's your step level, where are you eating, right? So it gives you some high fidelity of what it is saying. And then once you actually move there, it can potentially be your outfitter. It can ask you questions about what the fit is. It could advise you to put your arms out and kind of take a little measurements of how the cloth folds and hangs. And so a lot of it is going to be this interactive element. It's not going to be the static impression of a thing. It's going to be this thing that knows you very, very well based on all the data it's collected.
And will that thing, you think, follow me around from brand to airline to...
It should, conceptually. I mean, if you think of all the challenges of the Omniverse, right? The big concerns about a successful Omniverse would do exactly what you're saying. But what happened? There were 50 Omniverses.
Yeah.
And so that interconnection is going to be a problem. So eventually this deepfake thing is going to have widespread acceptance on the consumer side, the retailer side.
Chris, you're laughing a little evilishly.
Oh, 100%. Because that's where my brain goes. Yeah, I mean, that's where my brain goes. But I love the idea of that because, again, if you think about it, we all carry phones around with us. We all carry basically our fingerprints, our digital fingerprints with us. Mm-hmm. So as you walk into store to store to store, the ability for my phone, as long as I give it permission to then talk to the system, to then go, hey, this is Chris. This is who Chris is. And whether that turns up on a board, whether I see myself in something, whatever it might be, that's going to be the interesting part about it, is how much of that am I willing to hand over and all of that side of it. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's room for all sorts of interesting areas to go through.
Yeah, I think we can all understand the value of hyper-personalization for a retailer. Adam, are we doing any of this type of work right now? And if so, even if it's in nascent stages, what are the lessons learned?
So we are doing personalization across multiple retailers. And what we're learning, again, is the importance and criticality of that data foundation, number one. We are increasingly having conversations, again, about that assortment of data and whether it's appropriate or not. And the third piece we're having are these retailers are still struggling with how to message the utility of this data, right? In order to achieve a certain outcome on your behalf, I'm going to need X, Y, and Z. So getting the trust. And although I think, I love your take, I suspect that consumers' reluctance to give data through the years has kind of...
Oh, it's changed.
It's changed.
It's absolute. I mean, you think about it. I mean, even in the breach world is a perfect example of this one. You go back almost 20 years when one of the first breaches occurred. I mean, it happened and the consumers wanted to tar and feather every single person that was there. I mean, it's terrible.
That's right.
Fast forward to now, number one, I don't know what the latest breach was. I have no flipping clue.
That's right.
I find the database.
It's normalized, it's every day now, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So at that point in time, I think people have also gone to the point where they know they have to hand things over. Mm-hmm. They unknowingly do it. We've basically been trained. And I'll be honest, even on my side of things, with the skeptic I am, if I could walk into somewhere and go, okay, I actually like that on me, rather than having to go through the flipping hassle of gathering it up, getting into the changing room, faffing around in the changing room, if I can literally walk in and go, how's that clicked? Oh, I like that. Mm-hmm. I'm done. I'm sold. Take it away. I'm willing to hand over. And again, it comes back to a risk probability thing. If I trust that retailer, then this is back to the normal thing. I value certain retailers over others. I know who's going to sell my data. Same thing with any of the apps we put on our phones. Yeah. Some apps sell every single thing they possibly can. Some are like, hey, we're going to be very careful with the data. So I think that's the other part of this, is retailers are going to have to be very, very careful how they message out, how they're going to use that data, who they're going to share it with, how well they'll do their best efforts to protect it.
And that last part of our protection is kind of the fourth bucket we're learning is the level of measures put in place may not be as rigorous as required. And so, again, at Worldwide, we have a very strong cyber practice, and we also have relationships across not only the industry, but also kind of within global intelligence organizations. And so it's been very obvious that over the past 18 months or so, the number of attacks on marquee U.S. companies have shot through the roof. And it's not necessarily to collect that data. It certainly is, but it's also to do brand damage. You take a marquee U.S. brand and you take it down. You take a marquee AI product and you have another product superseded. There is something to be said about that on a political stage. And so the conversation we're having with our customers is about that security side. And we've had multiple conversations over the past 3 weeks where we found very concerning gaps, extremely concerning gaps on the retail side that would absolutely impact operations, but also really damage a brand.
Where are the gaps at?
It's the basics.
Can't tell you that.
It's some of the basics. It's like anything. If you walk into an organization and you ask them where their assets are, be they physical assets or digital assets, most organizations have an idea where all their assets are, but very, very few of them, unfortunately, could put their hand on their paw, put their hand on the table and go, we know where everything is. That's just simply data sprawl, system sprawl, architecture sprawl, and the fact that maybe organizations haven't actually implemented everything as well as they should have done. So found a few holes in a few areas and given a few people some things to think about.
So you mentioned back to the basics. What else can organizations do, knowing that this is likely and probably inevitable to come down the line?
100%,
what should they be doing to make sure that this is a secure solution that provides value but also is secure?
I think the biggest part is, the nice thing about working here is we have that team that can come in and go, hey, what do you want to build? How do you want to build it? Now, as you're building it, you need to trust that data. You need to go, hey, I'm going to train the model to look at Adam and go, hey, this is Adam and this is Chris. That data has to be as immutable as possible. So now we get to data handling standards. Now we get to data safety and security. Now we get to how is it immutable? Who has access to it? So we start talking about identity, access management, control. And once you have those conversations, organizations start to understand it's, unless they have good data governance, handling, management, sanitization, they're not going to get the results they really want to actually see. So again, to Adam's point earlier, a lot of it comes down to data. And then it's just best practices. It's also the considerations for who's built the model, what model have they built. We talked about this off camera when, we're talking about all the questions people should ask. And again, that's the nice thing about what we do. We can go in and be the bad guys that ask all the awkward questions to go, hey, you've got this learning model. How is it learning? Where's it learning? Where's it pulling from? How often is it learning? When it makes a mistake and it puts my hoodie on Adam or vice versa, how is it going to know it made a mistake? And how do I retrain it?
And we've already established my favorite model is Cara Delevingne. So my favorite boxer is Mike Tyson, and he's famous for the quote of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So no plan's foolproof. So you also talk about in the event that a customer does have that vulnerability that is attacked.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? What kind of capabilities are we showing here that we have for that recovery piece?
We got there's some really cool stuff that we're building. It's a ton of fun. So we've got, I do and I don't like the digital twin word. It's got some good connotations, but it's also got some challenging ones. But I'm going to use it what it is. It is the digital equivalent of me. And if you think about it, as a human being, I like pressing buttons. I want to click on the next email. I want to click on the next button. I want to download the next thing. But if I had my twin that did it for me and it fell into the pit or it got its backside handed to it or whatever else it might be, I'm okay with that because it hasn't impacted me. So we're building out some fantastic stuff at the moment. Some really, really cool tech where it makes those decisions. So you almost get into, you take it from a very reactive situation and you start getting very proactive and predictive. And the nice thing about the AI world is you can build some really, really good predictive modeling.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned digital twin. Are we talking digital twin and deepfakes in the same kind of ballpark here? Should we come up with a new name for deepfake so it's not as necessarily scary when it's deepfake for good?
Oh, good luck on that one. Yeah, good luck. It's like hackers. I am a hacker, and yet I do the best I can for good. But we tend to get blamed for a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. I at some point, somebody somewhere is definitely going to come up with a better word for it because it's an individual thing. I think this is where it gets interesting is a lot of the learning models are across a population or an area, an organization. But for me, what we're trying to build and what we're doing some really fun things with a couple of the retail and a couple of the areas is very much an entity that lives on our device that represents us. And it pulls from all those different data sources and it pulls all the information and it can make very predictive knowledge as to basically what we're going to do next.
And words do matter. And if you look at some of the legislation that's popular, so over half of the states have some legislation on deepfakes. And so if you look at the wording, you're starting to see a consistent deepfake, but now it's artificially generated images or synthetically generated. So there's already, I'll say, some softening of that. But to his point, someone's going to come up with a killer word at some point. I'm not that guy, and it's not now.
Yeah, and I know we only have a few more minutes left, but you mentioned, policy. What else can we expect from a policy and regulation standpoint, understanding that all of this is moving so quickly?
Yeah, I can take a stab from a policy chuckle. From a policy perspective, it really falls into three buckets. One is election interference. And so really notifying folks that this image was generated. And we saw that in 2024 across both parties at a state and local level using deepfakes for their purposes. So that's a challenge. The other one is with regard to revenge pornography and illicit images of children. And so that is the focus. With regard to consumer protections, it's not really there yet. It's likely covered under some other fraud language. But there are other measures being taken, right? From deepfake watermarking, which is kind of sort of iffy.
Yeah, I think there's 110 or 120 or so things going through legislative review at the moment, covering deepfakes in all sorts of different areas. So it'll be interesting to see what shakes out. Mm-hmm. Some consumer fakers, some data fakers. Now, obviously, with a change in leadership, we'll see what actually gets through and what doesn't. I think no matter what legislation says, I think the best we can probably do is not just educate the organizations, but definitely do what we can to educate the consumers and go, hey, here's what's coming down the line. And this is what I love about doing things like this is we get to put this out and go, hey, listen to this.
And there's also an element of the actual technology providers, right? And so listing out the responsibilities of those that house this information or distribute it, that there's responsibility there. And so just yesterday, I believe the First Lady put together a deepfake celebration in Washington, and it was passed in the Senate, and President Trump indicated. And so it is specifically around those three use cases: election, child pornography, and revenge pornography. The implementers or housers have a requirement within 48 hours to pull it off their sites. And so now, similar we saw, a couple of years ago with regard to content moderation, we're starting to see a similar practice rear up, which, to Chris's point, there are many folks and entities that are going to have a role in containing this.
Yeah,
big time.
Any lingering questions that you think organizations, whether it be retailers or anybody across the board from any industry, that they should be asking themselves now as we head into this future of deepfakes and using it for good?
Ooh, man, that's an open.
It is a broad.
That's a broad one.
I think
for me, I think the first one is one of the ones we typically ask is why. Why do you want to use it? Are you using it because you're chasing everybody else, or what are you trying to gain from it? Because we've seen this too often in technology. Everybody jumps on the technology, but doesn't really have a good business case, which is why it tends to fall by the wayside. Again, I think that's where it's fun sitting down, talking with you, with the retailers, is we get to do the workshops, we get to sit down, we get to not just dig into the tech, but the business, what's driving it. You get to ask the business, where are they going in 5 or 10 years? And we've done, that thing we did, we literally threw the crystal ball out on retailers 5 years out and said, where are you going to be? And I think it's nice because that drives the conversation to a success. It drives it to deliverables and metrics that you can actually sit there and go, hey, we did make a difference.
Yeah. If you look at just capital allocation within an organization, take Gen AI, they didn't grow their IT budget exponentially. They had to pull from other parts of the organization. So a massive reallocation and reprioritization had to happen. It's the same thing with deepfakes or any other technologies. The why, because that money is likely to come from somewhere else. And so you have to make the case. And so it's not always necessary for every use case.
I think the other one, thinking about this as well, this is where, again, IT and security are going to have to come out of their silos. When you think about it, this so much of our technology is behind the scenes. But when you look at this is interactive with everybody else. So we have to go talk to the sales and marketing teams. We have to go talk to legal and compliance. We have to have those conversations with the business to understand where they're going with it, which is going to force a set of communication collaboration functions that we're not the best at doing.
Right. You add, like you mentioned, there's a technology, there's a business, there's a marketing, there's a crisis control, there's a product. I mean, all of these, particularly for this deepfake thing, all have to work together to get to a point and then react should adverse events happen.
Yeah,
great point.
Yeah. Well, lots of work ahead of us. To the two of you, we're running on time here, so thank you so much for joining. Adam, first time, and Chris, look forward to having you on a third time for that, maybe sometime soon. Thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, that's a wrap on this episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast. Of course, big thanks to Adam and Chris for a conversation that challenged how we think about synthetic personalization and AI's evolving role in our lives. Here are 3 key takeaways from today's discussion. First, AI isn't just accelerating, it's becoming ambient. From personalized ads to interactive store displays, we're entering a new era where artificial intelligence blends seamlessly into everyday life, shaping decisions in ways we may not even notice. Second, that democratization of AI has opened new doors. What was once enterprise only is now consumer grade, and that shift is unlocking creative and commercial potential across all sectors, just like retail. And third, technology isn't inherently good or bad. It's about how we use it. Deepfakes for deception are dangerous, but deepfakes for personalization? Well, that might be the next frontier in customer experience, giving brands the power to create moments that feel deeply individual and emotionally resonant. Thanks again for tuning in. If you found today's conversation insightful, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone exploring the intersection of AI and innovation. This episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast was co-produced by Naz Baker, Kara Kuhn, Mallory Shaffron, Stephanie Hammond, and Marissa Reed. Our audio and video engineer is John Knobloch, and my name is Brian Felt. We'll see you next time.